I usually like movies like that, but I don't know. I just didn't like Sinners. Ugh, don't look at me like that. Maybe I just didn't like how my group was portrayed. So in a film that centers Black Americans, you're centering yourself. What's really going on with some non-Black Americans' reaction to Sinners? I'm Dr. Batty. Let's chat. Welcome to Psych Chats with me, Dr. Batty, where I apply my lens as a professor and psychologist for over 10 years to analyze pop culture issues. Remember to like, share, and subscribe if you like my content. The movie Sinners was released in April 2025, and already it has made such a stir in the culture. And by all standards, really, Sinners excels, whether you're talking about cinematography, music, historical accuracy, storytelling. And so in so many ways, Sinners has broken new ground, and maybe most importantly, it really centers the African-American experience, which, as I'm going to talk about in this video, is actually very important for us as non-Black Americans to really try to take in. For a full understanding of Sinners and its cultural significance, listen to Black Americans. This video is not that. This video is more about navigating your reactions as a non-Black American. Black Americans, like any group, are not a monolith, by and large feeling very seen and very represented and reflected in Sinners. And so that's really important just right off the bat. So we know that about the movie. And I discuss things like sexism and racism and classism in my classrooms. What often happens is that as marginalized voices become more vocal, that there is resistance from people who are not in that group to hearing those truths, and a tendency to sort of push back by like reinforcing the status quo. But we can just be aware of them and be honest about them and be critical of our own reactions, something I call critical reflection. And this particular process of introspection is particularly important when we are encountering Black American art. Real Poly Life from Instagram explains this very well, so I'm going to play some of her video here.
No one has that shared community that we have as Black Americans, from building this country from the ground up, from creating all forms of music as we know it, from developing culture out of nothing, from creating food and a cuisine out of trash and scraps. We built our culture from nothing. Our original cultures were taken from us.
So essentially, Black Americans, despite having to endure enslavement, despite having their own cultural ties erased and their own communities severed, despite all that, African Americans were able to create this culture. Black American culture really is U.S. culture. To learn more about the fact that Black Americans really shaped every facet of U.S. culture, I recommend a book entitled African Founders: How Enslaved People Expanded American Ideals. Not only has Black American culture really influenced and shaped U.S. culture as a whole, but also Black American culture has really influenced culture around the world, because America obviously is a very powerful nation in the world, and a lot of things that are exported are things that are grounded in African American style. One really good comment about this is from this article entitled How Black Americans Have Shaped Cool Globally. And in that article, there's a quote by an African American studies scholar named Mark Anthony Neal. He states that Black American culture has always been one of America's greatest exports, particularly throughout the 20th century. It has actually done important labor in terms of connecting global communities, both in terms of the interests of the US and just people across the globe. As an immigrant, I was sold this idea of the American dream. When you picture like the American dream and who achieves the American dream, generally people are going to imagine white folk. What I didn't know when I was younger as an immigrant is how much of what drew us to the US and what made the US successful is Black Americans. So as immigrants, we're really being sold this idea that of this American dream that was built on the backs of African Americans, that was built on the backs of the indigenous folk that were already here. So it's really important, I think, for my fellow immigrants to really recognize that as well. There's a lot of anti-Blackness potentially in our communities, and also that what we see as the American dream, we have to credit Black Americans for that, for building that. And so that culture, that US culture that's shipped everywhere around the world, that idea of what's cool, that really is shaped by Black Americans, that's imitated by other groups in the US. And then again, these styles are exported everywhere. And yet the face of US culture is white. The face is white, but the backbone is Black culture. And so, in other words, Black American culture has been stolen, it's been exploited, and it's been erased. And so, as non-Black Americans, this is very important. We have all benefited from the oppression of Black Americans. So, the least we can do with respect to that is recognize it and try to break the cycle when possible. Sinners is a distinctly Black American story. So as outsiders to the community, for you non-Black Americans, that's what I mean by outsiders. It's not that we can't necessarily critique Sinners, but it's really important to take care with that, because critiques from outsiders can actually be very healthy sometimes. They can, start conversations, they can promote really healthy dialogue, but there's a condition. In order for those outsider critiques to really help push the discourse forward, they have to center the community in their critique. So they have to know the community, they have to really keep the community in mind as they are making their critiques. Failing to center the community perpetuates oppression. So how does critique from outside the community become harmful? I'm going to talk about 4 ways. So 1, speaking over. 2, erasure. 3, reinforcement of stereotypes. And 4, tone policing. Let's get into it. Speaking over the community rather than with the community occurs when we are positioning ourselves as an authority over the culture. And like with all of these can be done in a well-meaning way. It doesn't necessarily mean your intentions are bad, but the impact that it has can be harmful. Intent versus impact. So speaking over the community, let's look at some examples of that. Sinners was just too heavy. I hate to break it to you, but Sinners is historically accurate. The truth should not have to be in a pretty bow for you to accept it. So first of all, being able to say that this subject matter is too heavy for me and I want to distance myself from it is a privilege that Black Americans do not have. So you being able to block out that truth, say it's too much for you, that someone else's reality or this group's reality is too much for you, that is you putting your own feelings above what the community could actually be saying. And if we listen more closely, we can we can figure out what the community is actually saying. But if we're already dismissing it as it was too heavy for me, then we're not coming in with that open mind, and we're less likely to learn from that. It also harms non-Black Americans because it disconnects us from our humanity when we push that reality away. Sinners really just like alienated me and made me feel bad. Are you serious? The vast majority of mainstream films cater to you. So yeah, the vast majority of films do absolutely cater to white folk, to non-Black Americans, but mostly to white folk. When you are used to being centered, equality feels like oppression. Now this other group that has historically been erased is centered. That can cause discomfort and make someone be like, oh, no, I need to be centered again. Often it's not even conscious. So really trying to sit with that feeling of why am I feeling alienated, and am I letting in those stories? Am I letting them in mentally as well as emotionally? Hello, I've been to Africa. I don't know why you're saying I need to have Black Americans explain it to me. Huh? Africa's not a shortcut to understanding Black America. Sinners is distinctly an African American story. If you just stop to listen with some humility, you would learn so much. The director of this movie, Ryan Coogler, really took such great care with all of the stories that are depicted. The Native, the Choctaw, they praised him for how he represented them well. The aspects of the Irish as being the oppressor and also the oppressed, that's also very accurate. And he really took care with the African stories as well and really collaborated with Africans to try to portray those in ways that were accurate and respectful. But ultimately, the film is a Black American film. So having knowledge of Africa or being connected to Africa doesn't necessarily make someone an authority on this film. The way that they're interpreting Africa is the Black American way of interpreting Africa. So again, we have to look at it through a Black American lens and not a Pan-African lens. Erasure has been a part of the Black American experience, and as non-Black Americans, we reinforce that erasure when we exclude the African American context. So let's look at some examples of this. Sinners, it's just a vampire story. Okay. Way to dismiss its profound significance. Sinners has been called a cultural phenomenon. There's a million ways to interpret a movie, right? Especially a movie that has so much intricate details in it. And it's not necessarily wrong to consider it a vampire movie, but to characterize it completely as just a vampire story is a problem because there's so much that we can learn from this movie. They've already started to create syllabi in colleges from the movie. There's so many themes that are worthy of study, that are worthy of discussion. So it's definitely not just a vampire story, although that part is good. I don't know why they had to use military. I'm personally all about peace and love. I too am not a fan of the military-industrial complex, but do you actually think that Black people have the same relationship to the military as white folk? When we're discussing the military-industrial complex, it's really important to discuss the role of Black Americans within the military as well. And the truth is that from the time that Black Americans were enslaved, one of the ways that they could become free was to join the military. Joining the military for a Black American was not a means of, what maybe people would think of when we join the military always. It might have been all those meanings as well, but it was also survival. So when you discount Black Americans' military service, especially in that time period, as just part of the military industrial complex, and you equate Black Americans' engagement with the military with other groups' engagement with the military, that colorblind approach is inaccurate and just harmful. Sinners like shows people like racial groups just turning against each other, and like, why can't we all just get along? What? Showing historical truth? That's not divisive. Solidarity should never require erasure. Yeah, I mean, she said that pretty well, huh? Us non-Black Americans have not historically shown strong solidarity, despite that Black Americans often show solidarity with causes outside their community. And in order for there to have been solidarity in this movie, basically Black Americans would have just had to put aside, first of all, we would have had to put history aside, and maybe it just could have been a pure fantasy. The film showed accurately what happened, but also, in order for there to have been solidarity, there has to be this acknowledgement of the harm that's been done to Black Americans. You can't move forward in any relationship when you haven't acknowledged the harm that's been done. And there's a great article entitled Sinners and the Urgency of Preserving Historical Truth by Michelle Bryant. And I just want to read a quote from this article. More than just a movie about vampires, this film is a cinematic tapestry of the often erased histories of marginalized communities, Chinese immigrants, Native Americans, the Irish, and most certainly African Americans, all of whom played pivotal roles in shaping the United States. The erasure of these histories from mainstream education is not new. However, it has taken on a renewed urgency in recent years. Across the country, we are witnessing coordinated efforts to sanitize history curriculums, ban books, and assimilate everyone into the melting pot. That's exactly why history and education are so critical. Without them, we lose the ability to recognize the connections between past and present and can be doomed to repeat mistakes of the past. Sinners is not just a great movie. It's a case study of why we must fight to preserve and teach history in all its complexity. It's a reminder that the stories we tell and the stories we omit shape how we see ourselves and each other. I hope this film inspires each of us to learn more, teach it to others, and protect those lessons for future generations. This is not just an academic exercise, but a moral imperative. Another theme that I've noticed in outsiders' critiques of Sinners is reinforcement of stereotypes. And I've noticed this particularly with the character of Annie. Let's look at some examples. Oh my God, Becky, Annie's just not cute. I can't see. I mean, yeah. Can you see? So she is obviously incredibly beautiful. This idea that she's unattractive because of her body, because of her dark skin is ludicrous and clearly is just so shaped by our conditioning. Annie just like didn't really feel like a lover to me. Like she felt more like a mom. Yeah, her character was nurturing, but she's also stunning. You really need to get out more. So this harkens back to the way that Black American women are always expected to give service to others. Back during slavery, Black American women were expected to take care of other people's children and had their own kids ripped from them. And that pattern of just expecting Black American women to put everything of themselves aside and just give to everyone else still is very prevalent today. And so one of the ways that that comes out is this idea that Black women are always maternal or nurturing. And if you're not, you could be labeled as the angry Black woman. And you definitely can't be maternal and sexy. That's not possible, apparently, which is obviously proven wrong in this movie. To really understand that, I want to look at a quote. And this quote is from an article entitled "Sinners Tries we deny on desiring fat Black women. And the article is by Joel Ganaway. To understand the audience's misreading of Annie, we need to take a step back and examine the historical baggage that shaped our perceptions of fatness and Black womanhood in American culture. Enter the mammy, a long-standing archetype that has been used to regulate full-bodied Black women to secondary roles, usually that of the sexless maternal figure ready to nurture but never to receive, never to receive that romantic or sexual affection or attention herself. And further complicating the Black female representation in the mammy archetype is the racialization of fatness. In Fearing the Black Body, sociologist Sabrina Strings explores how fat phobia and anti-Blackness intersect, painting fat Black women as the embodiment of excess in every sense of the word. So like excessive in terms of size, emotion, morality. The fat body in this context would be linked to ideas of moral inferiority, further subjugating Black women and solidifying their role only as caregivers, never as an object of desire. As Strings asserts, fatness became stigmatized as both Black and sinful, a view that has embedded itself in American racial and religious ideologies, framing fatness as a moral failure and a marker of racial inferiority. So these two intersections of being fat and being a Black woman, particularly a dark-skinned Black woman, are alive in responses to Annie. It's so like obvious that Mary is way sexier than Annie. Like, hello. Obviously sexier? No. They are both gorgeous. Maybe take off your whitewash glasses and look again. You know, when I started my journey of just trying to not center what I'd been taught to value, blonde hair, blue eyes, thin body, all these things that I'd been taught was beautiful. When I started my journey of trying to unlearn that, it's still a process. But when you do that, I think it really opens you up to so much more beauty, because the standards that we're taught often are very narrow. And so when we are able to release some of those things we've been conditioned to think, that opens us up to a whole new world. Tone policing is demanding that an artist change how they express themselves to make their work more digestible to others, easier to take in, to be respectable to the dominant culture. So what are some examples of this?
I just didn't really get why the characters had to be just so angry.
You really don't think that Black Americans have a right to be angry after centuries of oppression? You get angry when you break a nail. When Black Americans express anger about the oppression that they've experienced, that is actually a healthy response. That is actually valid and justified.
I mean, obviously I support the message, but the delivery was just kind of aggressive.
Okay, so Black folk have to talk in a way that makes you comfortable. Okay. Anger is an emotional response that often scares people, and especially if it's coming from Black Americans. For non-Black Americans, often that anger is perceived as threatening and aggressive, whereas that same behavior by a non-Black person wouldn't necessarily be perceived that way. So in this video, I have discussed 4 types of reactions from non-Black Americans to sinners. And hopefully you were able to learn something from this video and look at your own reactions as non-Black Americans and really try to disrupt that cycle of oppression rather than perpetuating the cycle of oppression against Black Americans. And I want to, as a parting thought, leave you with some words from someone that I find very inspiring, Marjorie Lane on Instagram. What they said really highlights for me how much sinners can teach us as non-Black Americans if we just are able to let go of the lenses that we've been conditioned to see through. So as Marjorie Lane beautifully states, and the creator's name is Ebony Higgins, take off those lenses and deep dive into why so many Black Americans, specifically those of us with ancestors who served in World War I, who are veterans in a country that disenfranchises us, who have combat PTSD, who are hoodoo spiritualists, conjurers, children of the church struggling with religion, who have Irish last names or indigenous ancestries, but cannot claim or do not want to claim these lineages, who use our hoodoo, voodoo, or Santeria to solve problems and bridge gaps, who have failed at carving a spot for ourselves in capitalism, who yearned to see the two worlds of being both African and American collide, and more. Why did we find the sinners so captivating, and why did we feel like it was an act against colonization for us? Thank you for watching, and please like, share, and subscribe if you like the video.